Major breaking news. A federal district court judge in Massachusetts has thrown out of court a major lawsuit brought by the government of Mexico against America's major gun companies. The decision in this case was based on what is known as a lack of personal jurisdiction. And as you know, we've talked about on this channel the importance of not just understanding the substance of the Second Amendment, the substance of law. It's extremely important for you to understand how the process of cases go from womb to tomb, because sometimes the best way to defend our constitutional rights may be through process and procedures. Let's talk all about it when we get back, and how the government of Mexico has failed in their attempt to destroy the American gun industry. Stay tuned. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and author of the brand new best-selling book, Israel Disarmed: What the 10/7 Attacks by Hamas on Israel Teach Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. We must always learn from the mistakes of others. And in the book, Israel Disarmed, I talk about the history of the Jewish people, the history of Israel, and the terrible mistakes made by the government of Israel in not encouraging their citizens in modern life to be privately armed with appropriate, adequate firearms to fend off bad people like terrorists and terrorist attacks. Check out Israel Disarmed on Amazon. If you've already got a copy and you've read it, feel free to leave a review on Amazon. I always enjoy reading reviews of my work, and I learn from them as well. All right, major breaking news. As you may recall, the government of Mexico, my guess is in coordination and in consultation with the Biden administration, also known as the Biden-Kamala Harris administration, had sued the major gun companies in the United States, and they had sued in a specific jurisdiction, which is the worst jurisdiction, in my opinion, for the American gun industry and for gun owners. And that's Massachusetts. Specifically, the government of Mexico sued the following gun companies. They sued Beretta, Barrett, they sued Century Arms, Colt, Glock, Sturm Ruger. That's right, they sued Barrett, Beretta, Century Arms, Colt, Glock, and Sturm Ruger, among some other companies, but those are the major manufacturers. They sued them on the grounds that somehow, some way, the alleged conduct by these gun companies somehow gave rise to guns flowing down to the country of Mexico, which were then in turn used for criminal conduct to cause gun violence in the country of Mexico. And the government of Mexico sued these gun companies, claiming that they were the cause of crimes in Mexico. Totally an absurd BS set of allegations and arguments, in my opinion. But guess what? The government of Mexico, obviously in consultation with American lawyers who know what they're doing, my guess, knew that if they sued in the right jurisdiction, they might get a positive outcome against the American gun industry. And that could give rise, this is my best guess, but I'm pretty good at this, one of two outcomes. They might destroy the American gun industry, which is good for anyone that hates Americans with guns, because you and I can't get guns unless we can acquire them, and most people acquire them from buying guns from companies that make guns in America, right? We buy guns through an FFL, and those are made by gun companies. So if you have no gun companies making guns for the civilian market, well, you've cut off the supply of new guns for people like you and me. Or alternatively, the other alternative might be that these gun companies might choose to stop selling guns into the civilian market and just cater to government contracts, whether to the federal government or, let's say, to state and local law enforcement. Either way, this would be a big win for America's anti-gun movement. So my guess is that the government of Mexico worked with the Biden-Harris administration to tee this lawsuit up, and they sued in the exact perfect location for this kind of a lawsuit. Specifically, they sued in Massachusetts, which, as we've talked about before, Massachusetts is governed or overseen by the federal appeals court known as the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit out of Boston, which is an undeniably 100% terrible anti-gun court, anti-Second Amendment, so bad by my review, there is not a single 3-judge panel that you could conceivably get that would be anywhere positive, neutral, or good on Second Amendment issues at all. There are no such thing as a good or even average panel when it comes to Second Amendment rights in the First Circuit Court of Appeals out of Boston, and that is almost certainly why the government of Mexico, of all the states in America, decided to sue in Massachusetts to benefit from the terrible anti-gun jurisprudence of the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. But I'm happy to report that today, the federal judge in Massachusetts dismissed the lawsuit against these gun companies on the grounds that that court lacks what's known as personal jurisdiction. Now, just to step back for 1 minute, and then we'll specifically talk about what this case was about and what the judge decided. This lawsuit had previously been dismissed by the federal district court judge on the grounds that the case violated the federal firearms immunity statute known as the Protection of Commerce Lawful Arms Act, or PILCA. Okay? And that law says basically that you cannot hold gun companies, gun manufacturers, civilly liable for criminal conduct engaged in by third parties over whom they have no control, which is basic tort law all across the world, all across the country, that you can't hold me responsible for the conduct of third parties over whom I have no control. So if some gangbanger uses a baseball bat I manufactured, or a gun I've made, or a VCR or a CD player or internet website, whatever it is, to engage in criminal conduct over which I have no control, you cannot hold me accountable. That's basic black letter first-year law student rules and understanding of tort law. But of course, in the 1990s, there was an attempt during the Clinton era to try to get around that basic tort liability, which gave rise to this federal statute enacted in 2005. And just as a side note, the reason why that statute was enacted was in part because the Pentagon argued that we needed a robust American gun industry, because that robust American gun industry was responsible for selling guns to the American military and to law enforcement. So if you destroy the American gun industry, we would be dependent upon buying our firearms from foreign manufacturers. And I don't think the Pentagon, I don't think you, I don't think anybody, including law enforcement, for example, has any interest in being dependent upon foreign manufacturers of firearms. So with that said, they enacted that law. Now, what happened was last year, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit said that despite that law existing, that was not sufficient to protect the gun industry in this case, because there were potential exceptions that applied. So they let the case go forward. But the good news is today that the federal district court, despite the fact there not being immunity, allegedly, that's up in front of the Supreme Court. We'll see what happens there. But they said despite the fact that there's no immunity under the federal law, which there really is, but they said there wasn't, they said it doesn't matter, because the federal district court judge today said, guess what? That there's no personal jurisdiction over these gun companies in Massachusetts, because these gun companies have no offices there. Their headquarters are not in Massachusetts. They're not Massachusetts companies. They have no connection to Massachusetts whatsoever. And by extension, they also have no connection between anything they've done in Massachusetts that could possibly realistically be connected up to crimes or illegality or problems or injuries in the country of Mexico. So the court here basically said, because there is no connection that could be established at this point between, again, the specific actions, alleged actions by these defendants in Massachusetts, and no connection from that to the injuries being alleged in the country of Mexico by the government of Mexico, there is what's a lack of personal jurisdiction. And when a court lacks personal jurisdiction, which means basically you have no connection whatsoever to that state, or that, well, in this case, to that state, or no connection to that state that specifically deals with the issues arising in that case, guess what? The case gets dismissed. And again, there's no general jurisdiction over these companies, because these companies they're not Massachusetts companies. So the only reason why the plaintiff government of Mexico sued them in Massachusetts was to forum shop to get a good anti-gun jurisdiction, obviously. But then when the court looked at in the details and the allegations and the evidence presented by the plaintiffs, government of Mexico, against these gun companies, they said, look, there's just nothing here. There's just speculation at most that suggests that these companies did something illegal in Massachusetts, right? And B, that those alleged illegal conduct or acts in Massachusetts somehow gave rise to illegal conduct in the country of Mexico, right? And there's no connection, in addition to that, to whatever illegally allegedly occurred in Massachusetts to the injuries to Mexicans in Mexico that the government of Mexico had to somehow pay for, like the medical cost of gunfire victims, let's say. And as a consequence, there was no personal jurisdiction that this court could exercise over these defendants. And as you know, there's basic rules. You may not know this, but under basic rules, again, if I've never been to the state of Kansas, let's say, and I have no connection to the state of Kansas, I've never done anything in Kansas, I've never done anything wrong in Kansas, a court in Kansas, as a general matter, cannot bring me in to answer a lawsuit or a case in Kansas, because that Kansas court lacks what's known as jurisdiction over me because there's no connection. And under basic constitutional due process law, you can't be forced to defend yourself in a case in another state without your consent, of course, unless, again, you have some direct connection to that state and what's being alleged. Now, there's some other exceptions dealing with what's known as general jurisdiction, meaning if I live in a state, then I can be sued in that state for anything. If I have a business in a particular state headquartered in Lake Delaware, then I can be sued for that business, anything that business does in Delaware, no matter where that activity occurs. I can always be sued where the business is located. But since none of these defendants, Barrett, Century Arms, Beretta, Colt, Glock, or Sturm Ruger, could be, had company, they didn't have offices, they had no salespeople apparently, they had no headquarters, they were not incorporated in Massachusetts, no connection to Massachusetts whatsoever. The only way the court could get jurisdiction over them is to somehow connect the dots between illegal conduct they committed in mass and the injuries suffered by the government of Mexico. And the court said there is simply no way you can establish that on this record or probably in any other respect. And therefore, these cases were dismissed against these defendants. Of course, these defendants could be sued in their home states of Connecticut or wherever they are, Tennessee, Vermont, Georgia, whatever their particular homes are. But and I know the government of Mexico is not going to do that. Why is that? Because as Jack Smith learned going after Donald Trump, if you try to go after Donald Trump in Florida, outside of the deep state Washington, D.C. jurisdiction or the deep state jurisdiction of New York City, guess what happens? You usually don't fare that well if you give rise to a fair fight. So the government of Mexico obviously has no interest in a fair fight under American law against these gun companies. That's why they specifically sued in Massachusetts, hoping that forum shopping decision would somehow allow them to sneak through and get all this discovery and impose all these costs and these burdens on these gun companies. But as of now, knock on wood, that is not going to happen because of this decision by the judge today. Now, of course, there will be an appeal taken up to that terrible anti-gun U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit out of Boston, so anything's possible, but this is going to be a stretch, and even the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, this might be a bridge too far for them to rule against the gun companies based on what happened here and the allegations and the facts presented so far. But anything's possible, and we'll keep you abreast as this case proceeds. But I'm happy to say that the government of Mexico, in their attempt to go after these gun companies, did not succeed as of now. Okay, folks, hope you learned something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. Make sure you subscribe and hit that like button. Don't forget to follow me on X at Four Boxes Diner, and we'll see you again soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.